welcome to today's lesson on the poem Television by Roald Dahl. And this poem is taken from Unit 8, Semester 3. The lesson is presented by Dr. P.V. Geetalakshmi Patnaik, Associate Professor of English, BJR Government Degree College, Narayanguda, Hyderabad. Let us quickly take a look at a brief biography of Roald Dahl. Dahl was born in 1916 in Wales to Norwegian immigrant parents and was named after the famous explorer Roald Amundsen. Roald Dahl was a novelist, short story writer, poet, screenwriter, and wartime fighter pilot. He was placed 16th on the list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945 by the Times in 2008 and is regarded as, I quote, one of the greatest storytellers for children of the 20th century, unquote. He wrote 19 books for children, including James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, etc. His adult works include Tales of the Unexpected and the short story Lamb to the Slaughter, etc. He won the World Fantasy Award for Life Achievement in 1983 and the British Book Awards Children's Author of the Year in 1990. Television is one of his most popular poems and is anthologized in textbooks all over the world. Television by Roald Dahl. Let us read the poem once. Television by Roald Dahl is here for you. The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned is never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we watch them gaping at the screen. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week, in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. They sit and stare and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it, until they're absolutely drunk with all that shocking, ghastly junk. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? It rots the sense in the head. It kills imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind. He can no longer understand a fantasy, a fairyland. His brain becomes as soft as cheese. His powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. All right, you'll cry. All right, you'll say. But if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. We'll answer this by asking you, what used the darling ones to do? How used they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Don't you know? We'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They would read and read and read and read and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks, one half their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves had books galore. Books cluttered up the nursery floor. And in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores, where smugglers rowed with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good. What can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. The younger ones had Beatrix Potter with Mr. Todd the dirty rotter, and Squirrel Nutkin Pigling Bland, and Mrs. Tiggywinkle, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost his rump, and Mr. Toad, and bless my soul, there's Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole. Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. So please, oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place, you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams and yells, the bites and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll now begin to feel the need of having something to read. And once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow so keen, they'll wonder what they'd ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did. I hope you enjoyed this reading of the poem. Let us take a quick look at the glossary, some of the difficult words. Clog means to block or choke up. Clutter means to fill a place with things that are not organized. Contented means to be satisfied or happy. Foul is unpleasant. Gape is to stare, to look at something or someone with your mouth open because you're so surprised. Ghastly is something which is extremely unpleasant or bad. Great Scott Gadzooks is, these are expressions of surprise or amazement. Junk refers to something which is useless, cheap, or some kind of shoddy material. Loll, to sit or lie down in a lazy, relaxed way. Lounge is to recline, move, or act in a lazy way. Muffled is subdued, to make a noise quieter, less clear. Nauseating is revolting, something that makes you want to vomit. Repulsive is something extremely unpleasant or disgusting. Slop, to keep oneself in a disordered way. Tot, a small child. So now let us move on to see how the ideas are developed in the poem. So for the sake of convenience, this long poem has been divided into 7 parts. And in the first part, we have the the lines from line 1 to 12. Let me read this part, and then we'll look at some of the most important ideas here. The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned is never, never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week, in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. These lines are very important because it is here that Roald Dahl introduces the central idea, which is that television is to be banned, that parents have to stop making their children watch TV because watching television has many evils. It results in many evil consequences in little children. And so it starts off without any great introduction. The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned is never, never, never let them near your television set. So he's unequivocal. Roald Dahl is very, very sure what he wants parents to do. He tells parents that they are not supposed to allow the children to come near near the television set. In fact, he says it's better still that the television is not installed at home at all. He calls the television an idiotic thing. I think students, you must be aware that the television is referred to as the idiot box. So here's it for us. Here's Roald Dahl calling it an idiotic thing. And so he says, in almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. So he takes many examples. He refers to many examples of houses to which he supposedly is supposed to have visited, and he comes back and says that he's seen many children there. He uses the word we, of course. And so maybe we are supposed to think that it is not just the speaker, that maybe there are other people with him who are of the same opinion. And so he says that in almost every house we've been, we watch them gaping at the screen. Children have been watching the screen open mouth. And look at the way he uses the words loll, slop, lounge about. So these words refer to the lazy, relaxed way in which children just lie down and watch the television without actually thinking or using their brains. And so he says, they loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. This, of course, is an exaggeration because naturally eyes don't pop out, but then he uses it. He uses this word in this phrase pop out just to make the parents or the readers aware of the evil consequences. And so there are two lines in parentheses and in inverted, in brackets, where he says, last week in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. This is just for the sake of emphasis because he wants to stress the fact that watching television has very, very bad consequences. And that is why this image of a dozen eyeballs on the floor is meant to stress this point. And so in the first few lines, what we have is the introduction of the central idea and the advice to parents that they should not allow their children to watch television. And this is reinforced by giving examples from around them to emphasize the evils of laziness and inactivity in children due to watching TV. And what happens next? Let us see. In the second part, there is again a reinforcement of the central idea. So he talks about all the different, the ways in which children are addicted to television. And he also gives many reasons for parents' indulgence. Let us see how he does it. I shall read it now. They sit and stare and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it, until they're absolutely drunk with all the shocking, ghastly junk. And from here onwards, he talks about how he understands the reasons for parents' indulgence, the reasons why parents allow their children to watch television. So let us see what they are. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. So the idea here is that parents allow their children to sit in front of the television and watch the programs for hours together because it keeps them out of trouble. It keeps the children out of trouble, and also because it gives the parents time to do their work. But then the speaker says, he asks the parents, but did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? So he asks the parents to stop and think about the consequences. It is very easy indeed for parents to allow the children to just sit in front of the TV. But then the speaker says, it is very important for parents to really stop and think whether they are doing the right thing. In the next lines, please see how capital letters are used. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 lines which use capital letters. And there's also the use of hyperbole or the use of exaggeration to emphasize a point. It rots the sense in the head, it kills imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind, it makes a child so dull and blind. He can no longer understand a fantasy, a fairyland. His brain becomes as soft as cheese, his powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. So all these are the consequences of watching television. Of course, they seem very exaggerated, but then it is very important for the speaker to emphasize the fact that watching television indiscriminately has a lot of consequences and parents have to think about them. And then he imagines as though parents come up with words like, all right, you'll cry, all right, you'll say, but if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. So he anticipates the kind of response that would come from parents where they would go on the defensive and say that, all right, fine, But yes, we understand what you're saying is right. But then what do we do to entertain our children? Please explain. And it is then that he says, we'll answer this by asking you, what used the darling ones to do? How used they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Don't you know? The tone in these lines is indicative of a kind of impatience, a kind of anger in the speaker, because he feels that parents ought to know what was done earlier. Parents ought to go back into their past, into their own childhood, and find answers to these questions instead of asking them to the speaker, instead of raising these questions and expecting the speaker to answer them, because almost all parents had done this when they were children themselves. And then he says, we'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They would read and read and read and read and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks. This is an indication that the speaker is very angry. And this is because what is to him very obvious is not so clear to parents all over the world. And so he says that parents ought to know that children in the olden days used to read. They would read a lot and then proceed to read some more. The words Great Scott, Gadzooks are expressions of surprise and amazement that parents don't remember this, that parents have forgotten their childhood. And so here in these lines, the use of capitals is very significant because they are used to emphasize the point that children used to read. And there is a reference to the way children would spend their leisure before the invention of the television, and that is the habit of reading that started in the nursery, and children had a real love for stories. As Roald Dahl says, one half their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves held books galore. Books cluttered up the nursery floor, and in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. So, in the olden days, children used to read a lot. They would have their parents read out stories to them. And so everywhere there were books around. One half their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves had books galore. Books cluttered up the nursery floor, and in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. And therefore, everywhere there were books, and children used to, everywhere they looked, they would find books. And so children used to love to read, and children used to love to be read. And that's why the poet shows a very significant contrast between the clutter of books in the nursery and the useless clutter in the head due to mindless watching of TV. In the earlier lines, if you remember, students, the television is accused of having cluttering up the minds of the children. And so here, Roald Dahl refers to the books which clutter up the nursery floor. But then, of course, this clutter has a very positive tinge to it, whereas the clutter here is very negatively portrayed. And then moving on, let us see. The speaker describes the kind of stories, images, and characters a child would find within these books. Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores where smugglers rowed with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. So he starts to describe the various wonderful stories that children used to read earlier. Wondrous, he uses so many adjectives to describe these tales. Wondrous, fine, fantastic tales, he says. And these tales are about dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores where smugglers rowed with muffled oars. The references are so good that they conjure up very exciting and adventurous tales in the minds of the reader. And the use of alliteration, where he says, pirates, purple pants, and sailing ships, and all this is meant to create an interest in the children's minds. Cannibals crouching around the pot, stirring away at something hot. So in these lines, he's describing the tales from his memory of his childhood. And then again, within the brackets, it's very interesting to see that the poet, the speaker himself becomes a cannibal. It smells so good. What can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. And so he enters the story in order to describe what is happening there. And then the younger ones had Beatrix Potter with Mr. Todd the dirty rotter. So this is a description of many stories. It's a reference to many stories, many interesting stories. And children, and especially, sorry, the parents are sure to remember these stories. And these lines will definitely remind them of all those wondrous, fine, fantastic tales that they had read about in their childhood. Similarly, when children read this poem, it will definitely compel them to abandon the TV sets and to seek out something new. Children will be interested in finding out what all these stories are about. And so these lines are very important because, in a way, the speaker here addresses both parents on one hand and children on the other. In the case of parents, it serves to remind them of their own childhood and the books that they had read in their childhood. And in the case of children, it kind of stimulates their curiosity and makes them want to read all these stories. So this passage is, this part of the poem is very interesting to note. In the sixth part, there is a kind of a nostalgia for the old days when children used to read with interest and enthusiasm. The speaker says, "Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago." So this is nostalgia, nostalgia for those old days, nostalgia for the childhood of the speaker, as well as the childhood of all the parents, of all the adults who read this poem. "So please," he says, "oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall." So what does he want parents to do? He wants parents to throw away their TV sets and instead install bookshelves on the wall. This is what parents can do for their children. And then he says, "Fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams and yells, the bites and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks." The speaker is very aware of children being very reluctant to give up their television sets. He knows that children would not want to throw away, would not want their TV sets to be thrown away. Children would never be interested or would initially not be interested in sitting down and reading books instead of watching television. And so he says, it's okay. Children may give you dirty looks. Children may scream and yell. Children may bite and kick. Children may also hit you with sticks. But then he says, ignore all these things because you would be doing something very good for them. Fear not, he says, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll now begin to feel the need of having something to read. And so he says, since Roald Dahl had 5 children himself, and he used to read out many stories, and he would also invent stories and tell them to his children every night. So he definitely knows the power of storytelling. He knows the power that stories in books have. He knows the power that these stories would have over the imagination of children. And so he says, it is okay if children are very reluctant in the beginning to give up television and read their books. And therefore he says, as parents, the best thing that they could do for their children would be to throw away the television sets and bring books into the house. And so he concludes, and once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow so keen, they'll wonder what they'd ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did. And so the final lines of the poem are, in fact, a very optimistic prediction of the reaction of children to the wonderful world of books. According to Roald Dahl, children are going to express joy, and this joy would grow every day. Children would also feel wonder at their earlier addiction to TV. And he says, Roald Dahl says that children would feel gratitude and love towards their parents. And even though this seems a little bit extreme, still it's easy to understand why Roald Dahl advocates the need for children to read books. And let us look at the last few lines again. And once they start what? Once they start reading books, and once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow so keen, they'll wonder what they'd ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. Look at the way he uses all these adjectives, which in fact make the reader feel as though television indeed is all these things put together. That the television screen is indeed nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive, a very disgusting thing. Though it seems, like I said, a little bit extreme, the idea behind the use of these words is that, parents understand the need to introduce reading books as a habit for their children. And so in order to convince parents first, Roald Dahl says that once parents introduce books into their children's lives, the children are definitely going to react in a way that would encourage them to keep doing it. And these children would definitely be very happy. They would also wonder why they had ever spent so much time, wasted so much time on television. And this would lead to a gratitude and love towards their parents. And so, dear students, the poem Television is actually, let us see, a poem which describes in detail the dangers of being addicted to television and the steps to be taken by parents to save their children. So it's a very long poem, but then most students enjoy this poem because there is the use of fun, there is the use of alliteration, there is a play of words used in this poem, and there are many techniques which Roald Dahl uses in order to make it very interesting for both parents and children. And so the speaker uses hyperbolic statements. Like we've seen, exaggerated statements are used by the speaker for the, in order to describe the dangers of watching too much television. And this is done in order to drive home his point that watching too much television is very bad for the minds of children, or it's very bad for children's minds. The poem is a plea to parents to do whatever they can to get their kids away from the television sets, and it advocates reading of books as a remedy. So reading books is supposed to be the only remedy for the evils of watching television. Though the children will not react well to this change, according to the speaker, eventually they will have no choice but to turn to books. And once they do it, the change is made, and they'll thank their parents and love them more than ever, says Roald Dahl. So, students, I hope you enjoyed this poem, and sit down today and ask yourselves if it is really correct to waste so much time on just watching television. There's a whole new world out there, and this world is filled with books. This world is filled with books which carry tales, which have wonderful tales, fantastic tales of adventures, of magic, of fantasy. And these books are filled with stories that talk about human lives, that talk about love, that talk about sympathy, that talk about the various struggles, various happiness, various joys and sorrows of human beings all over the world. And indeed, books have so many things that they can teach us. So children and parents, it is definitely time to give up watching television and enter the world of books, enter the magical world of books. So that's all for today. Thank you.